ska gå vidare och titta från det här liksom konstnärliga och projektspecifika och galna idéer till att titta på trender. Närmare bestämt 5 trender i Norden inom industriell träbyggnation. Och eftersom vår talare på den här punkten är engelsktalande så gör vi nu ett tillfälligt språkbyte. The Nordic Council of Ministers has initiated a project for exchange of knowledge within the area of wood construction. Among other things, they have studied how procurement can be used as a tool for increased wood building or wood construction. They also studied barriers as well as advantages and opportunities with shared learning and life cycle analysis. Nick Craig is a climate, energy and sustainability expert, and he's also the head of the Polar Research and Policy Initiative. On behalf of the Nordic Wood in Construction Secretariat, he has conducted a case study in the Nordic good practice. Of course, we are all eager to listen to the results and the 5 trends that has emerged from this study. So welcome, Nick.
Thank you so much, and thank you for inviting me. It's a real pleasure to be here today. Firstly, let me apologize for speaking in English and not in Swedish. I think the only thing that could make me more unpopular than a British person living in the European Union right now is to come and speak Danish to a room full of Swedes and Norwegians. So I'll go in English if that's okay with you. So thank you very much for the introduction. My name is Nick Craig, and I'm project manager at the Nordic Wood and Construction Secretariat. And I'm here to talk about some trends that we have been kind of identifying across the Nordic region within wood and construction, and also a little bit about the Sustainable Development Goals and some opportunities and trade-offs from some work we've been doing there. So a little bit about who we are. As Malin mentioned, we are an initiative set up by the Swedish government and the Nordic Council of Ministers, and what we do really is to support more wood in construction across the whole Nordic region. And we do that by undertaking a portfolio of projects that looks into some of the barriers for increasing wood in construction, and looking at that sort of thing, sharing knowledge and increasing cooperation across Nordic borders, from Iceland right through to Finland and everyone in between. And why do we do this? Well, aside from the climate crisis that we're facing, there's also a lot of financial, social and health benefits from building in wood that I'm sure all of you know all about. And the Nordics are a really shining example of how you can best build in wood, but its full potential through the entire value chain is really still to be realized at a Nordic level. So what I'm going to talk about a little bit is 5 trends we've come across from a piece of work we did last year. And this was a report that there are some copies I left kind of lying around here. So hopefully you managed to have a little flick through. And this was about 25 cases of best practice within the Nordic region for wood and construction. People often said to us, it all sounds great on paper, but how does it actually look like when we really start to build more with wood? So what we did was come up with 25 cases, concrete examples of best practice from across the full value chain, from production, forestry, right through to buildings and second life of wood. And what we found was 5 trends that some of these best practice projects have in common. And I'm going to run through these now one by one, but just to give you an overview: multifunctionality, saving time and costs, investing in scalability, pushing the boundaries, and circular design. And underlying all of those is digitalization. Now, the first trend in multifunctionality is all about how really the best buildings in wood in the Nordic region are maximizing the utilization of the spaces so that more people can use buildings in different ways at different times throughout the day. But not only temporally in terms of the time of day, but also how we can adapt buildings over their entire lifetime, how we can change them and adapt them in future spaces. And wood's a really good material for doing that. And we're finding some of the best examples, actually like BRF Ivalla in Linköping, not too far from here, about how you can use really easily replaceable elements to actually change the purpose of wooden buildings over time as their demand changes. And easily replaceable wooden elements that you can adjust and fit in and out are all part of that. And what that ultimately does is change the economic case for building in wood. When you can increase that longevity and future-proof those buildings, really means you're able to take a different look at it. The second trend we came across was how really the best buildings are really getting used to that, saving the time and costs that are available through prefabrication of modular elements in wood. Of course, you'll all be familiar how this reduces the time on site, minimizes disruptions to local communities, but also allows actually the creation of bespoke solutions that can be created in factories and put in straight onto site. In Uppsala, for example, we looked at Östersalebäck, which is one of the studies we have in the publication there. Now, of course, this cuts time and therefore cuts costs. And really where we're seeing the best benefit from this is where supply chains can be kept as local as possible, minimizing all those transport times. The third trend we found was investing in scalability. Now, as Per mentioned earlier, there are high capital and startup costs to really change practices within the construction sector. But actually, in the regions that are investing and committing to wooden construction, for example, through establishing wooden construction strategies, we're really finding that actually investing in that scale really helps to bring down costs. And a lot of that is driven through public procurement. And public procurement can then really drive change throughout the whole private sector. And the regions that are really leading are really actually, using public procurement as a driver for change. And it's only through that you can witness the scale needed to actually meet the potential that wood has to make a difference. And actually end up being a region where you can export knowledge and goods of this sector. Now, the fourth trend that we came across is really pushing the boundaries. It's absolutely not in question that the Nordics are building the tallest this, the largest that, the biggest this, the furthest north that. Proving that wood is adaptable to any setting, any environment. But what do we really need now do we need another taller building? Perhaps not. What we really need now is the scale and repeatability to bring down the costs and actually have a large-scale carbon impact. I'll come back to that point later. Lastly, we looked a little bit at circular design. And we're starting to see really small signs of people thinking about what will happen at the end of life from wooden buildings. But is it good enough just to think about the fact that we've created a building out of wood, and that's inherently a good thing, and that when this building comes to the end of its life, we'll chop it down and incinerate it and heat our homes? That's okay, but it's not really circular design in what its true form should be. We're starting to see the very best projects actually starting to design from the very design phase for disassembly, for you reusing those wooden elements in a new way afterwards, not just to burn them for heat, but to use them in another setting, a third, a fourth setting, before we then use them for energy. But that needs to become widespread, and at the moment, it isn't. And how can policy, regulation factor this in from the start of building? That's something to think about there. And there's also more and more companies starting to spring up using wood in a second life in a new setting as well. Now, underlying all of these 5 trends that we found is digitalization in every sector. Now, we've kind of come across 3 waves of digitalization that are impacting wood in construction. The first wave that's quite old now really is the kind of new tools and technology that can help efficiency and utilization of resources in new ways, tweaking at many things there. The second wave that we're kind of in the midst of now is digitalization of interfaces. So that's using trading platforms. For example, in Finland, there's a platform called Qtio that is a digital trading platform that really is cutting out the middleman there. But the third wave of digitalization that we're really starting to see that will make the biggest impact is not just tweaking around and efficiency changes, but actually disrupting entire business models through totally new ways of doing things. Now, in the second half of the time I've got to talk to you today, I want to talk a little bit about the Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, and a piece of work that we've done in looking at where wooden construction can help to meet the SDGs, but where also there might be some trade-offs, some downsides, some conflicts. We wanted to be a little bit more honest and critical rather than just say straight out, wood is good, but actually see where are the downsides, where should we pay a little bit more attention to. You know, if we increase that demand for wood in construction, what are the impacts? So in particular, I just wanted to talk through 5 of the Sustainable Development Goals that we looked at in particular. And firstly on Goal 7, which is all about affordable and renewable clean energy. And we looked at whether actually increasing demand for wood in construction would create competition for biofuels and change that market at all. And ultimately we found that ultimately it's a no, that better utilization and demand of forest resources means that it sits quite harmoniously with the biofuel sector and through more efficient use of side cuts, particularly. Looking at jobs, yes, the wood and construction movement can really drive bioeconomies, particularly in rural areas, and create lots of new jobs. But it's interesting to think about who those jobs are for. If we're pushing a part of the economy where the skill set lies mostly with men, are we going to leave women out of that argument? And how do we tackle that? Looking at goal number 12, which is on reuse, recycling, and waste, can we reduce waste from the construction sector by building wood? There is a huge amount of potential to do so, yes. But as I said earlier, this isn't maybe necessarily realized if we end up just burning it at the end of its life. It's no good. So we need to think really from the design stage about full reuse of wooden modular products. On climate change, I think this is spoken about most as the driver for using wood, the ability to take carbon out of the air, lock it up in tree, and lock it up in a building. And yes, that's fantastic. But what about increased harvesting in the forests? What does that do to forests' ability to adapt to climatic changes? What does it do to carbon storage in the forests, in those trees? Does it change it, and how? And also, looking at goal 15, what does that do if we increase the demand for harvesting on soil and biodiversity? We speak a lot less about the soil crisis globally, the biodiversity crisis globally. These are really serious issues that we also need to think about. So what were our key findings? Well, ultimately, there are a lot of wins on offer for the Sustainable Development Goals through enhancing the use of wood in construction, but we can't take these for granted. They won't happen automatically or by chance. What it hangs on mostly is sustainable forestry. And to do so, we need better, more holistic policy, both at a local, national, and regional level. We need regulation and certification that is fit for purpose, and ultimately, management and acknowledgement of the trade-offs that occur. So it's all very well talking about management, but there's no chance of managing anything without measuring what you're trying to manage. So we also need more research and understanding of what those trade-offs are, where the downsides are, so that we can talk more honestly and frankly about saying, yes, we're doing a good thing, but it's not completely good, it's just on balance good. And we need to talk better across different groups, particularly across different parts of the value chain who don't really talk necessarily well enough, especially people who decommission buildings and people who design buildings in the first place. But I don't want you just to take my word for it. Part of the study we did was a survey of experts from around the Nordic region, and here's some of the things that they had to say. There are good and bad forestry practice. What we choose is a matter of access to knowledge and policy. A systems approach is needed so that conflicting policies do not arise. And a strong legislative follow-up will be increasingly important. And also, certification schemes must be massively different from today. Now, we looked through the entire value chain and saw where the trade-offs and opportunities are. And I'm not going to run through these in detail, but as you can see, we started off right from the sourcing of the raw material, right through the construction and use, into the decommission. And in every stage, there are places where we can help deliver on the Sustainable Development Goals, but also places we just need to be a little bit more careful. So we came up with 6 recommendations. The first is that we need to improve and update certification policies and forest management. That's easy to say. What does that really mean? That means a more holistic way of thinking about start to end, from where those resources come from and where they end up at the very end and what happens in the meantime. We need to make sure that these potential conflicts between wood in construction and the Sustainable Development Goals are better understood and acknowledged at a policy level. And we need to handle the perception and knowledge asymmetries. That means that perhaps people who work within this industry have an inherent bias and actually just need to step back a little bit and say, yes, we are doing a good thing, but we know there are places that need managing. We also, on a specific point, need to consider mixed forests really importantly to making sure that those forests are resilient going into the future, and using design to think about the end of life for buildings from the very start, so that we can actually reuse and recycle more efficiently in wooden buildings. And also we just have to accept that wooden construction is a very good thing. We need to do more of it, but it's not a silver bullet. I'd also like to share with you a little bit about what the Secretariat is doing over the coming year. So we're coming to the final year of our 3 that the Nordic Council of Ministers initially commissioned us for. So we're doing 3 things this year, and the main focus that we have is on municipalities as agents for change within the Nordic region. And firstly, we're going to build a digital platform that will act as a roadmap for municipalities who have less experience with building with wood, to guide them through the advantages and pitfalls, helping them with public procurement and financing, and how to develop wood construction strategies at a municipal level. Secondly, we're going to look into life cycle analyses and do some capacity building activities with municipalities around the Nordics about how to better use life cycle analyses and wood construction, and how, through efficient and effective use of LCAs, we can actually change the environmental and economic case for building with wood. And lastly, we're going to do a policy analysis that's really going to look at the strengths and gaps within Nordic policy, not only at a local level, but a national level and a Nordic level as well. We're going to take that analysis around to democracy festivals in every Nordic country this summer and test some of those ideas and come up with some recommendations that we'll publish by the end of the year. That's something that is an open invitation for all of you here to get involved with. So please do come and speak to me afterwards about that. So thank you very much for listening. I'm happy to take any questions, but also I have some questions for maybe you if you wanted to start a dialogue over the next 10 minutes or so about the trends that you're seeing here within the bioeconomy region, and what the obstacles that you're meeting in building more with wood, and where is the action really needed, and how we can help you in your work as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. This was really a fireworks of very good findings and thoughts from your behalf. I want to just spare a couple of thoughts and when it comes to this conflict between the goals, because especially when you have been working in a project like this for several years, and the main discussion is the opportunities and development of a bioeconomy or bio-based economy, and that there really are some pitfalls if you totally forget to just consider or realize the conflict of targets. So why is this so important to remember and to actually be aware of?
Yeah, I think it's easy to get a little bit blinded by the opportunities, as you say, right? It's easier to not talk about what the potential downsides might be, but actually it's only through acknowledging them and talking about them openly that we can really do kind of more good, as it were. And it's okay to, if things do have a downside, everything that anyone does will do, but I think we just need to be a little bit more open and honest about what they are, and do a little bit more research and looking into what they are to manage those downsides a little bit better, would be what I'd say on that. Yeah.
There are a lot of talk about that we're now in the third wave of mass extinction, and then if we talk about this to sustain both biodiversity in the forest, as well as the quality of the soil. Are there anything in particular that you have thoughts on that are worth focusing on or preserve in a better way that we do today?
Yeah, I think it's firstly important to say that there are a lot of preserved areas that actually enhancing wooden construction doesn't put those at threat. Those areas remain preserved, and I think the Nordic region is an example to the world, and this is a lot of what we do at the Secretariat, is going and talking to other parts of the world about what we're doing in the Nordics. And the Nordics are really good at just protecting areas that need protecting. But areas that are in production, I think one of our main findings is that mixed forestry is really, really crucial to protecting the biodiversity and soil quality and stopping land degradation. Most of our findings led to the fact that it's possible to not make anything worse in that regard as long as the practices are right.
You also mentioned gender equality as one of the issues that we need to focus on, and we also had Per Aspengren earlier today talking a little bit about that. What are the findings that you have seen when it comes to creating jobs? Do the new jobs attract women in a more efficient way than the traditional jobs within the building or construction business?
Yeah, I think so. So I think a lot of it really comes down to training and education, in that very traditionally the skill sets have been male-dominated. And what we're starting to see in some places is actually initiatives that are really driven at bringing women into the education streams that will bring them into those jobs. And I think particularly in Finland, there's a lot of really great initiatives going on. And off the top of my head, I've gone slightly blank on them. But yeah, I think it all comes down to education and training to actually try and mismatch that. And again, it's about acknowledging that there is a problem there and doing something about it.
But are they getting any results? Because when it comes to technical educations and professions, there are. I mean, I have a background with the energy sector, and there is the same problem. And said, oh, we got to attract women, and we got to do things that are directed to make them to choose educations or programs that are directed in for our business, and it doesn't succeed that well. Do they succeed with this in Finland? So it would be worth.
Yeah,
out what they really
I
do.
think there are some really good initiatives happening in Finland. Again, off the top of my head, they're completely gone. I didn't really prepare anything on that for today. But yeah, there are some initiatives that are working in Finland, and I think are definitely worth having a look at.
Oh, exciting. We haven't prepared anything on Menti, but is there any question? We have time for one or two questions from you guys in the audience. Otherwise, Nick will be here during the break, so you can talk to him later and more after.
I don't want to hold anyone back from Fika for any longer.
Would be a crime, wouldn't it? No questions for now. So thank you. Give him a hand.